The blood on Xavier Yates's hands would not wash away, no matter how many times he plunged them into the cold river water, and he had begun to believe that maybe he deserved to carry that stain forever as penance for what he had done. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on his bare shoulders as he crouched by the riverbank 3 miles outside of Prescott in the spring of 1877, his horse nickering nervously behind him, as if the animal could sense the darkness that had settled into his master's soul. He had been riding for 6 days straight, moving without direction or purpose, just trying to put distance between himself and the body he had left behind in that saloon in Tucson. Self-defense, the sheriff had ruled, but that did not change the fact that a man was dead by his hand, and Xavier could still see the shock in those eyes as the bullet found its mark. He was 24 years old and had worked cattle drives since he was 16, had punched cows from Texas to Montana and back again, and never once had he drawn his gun on another human being until that night when whiskey and accusations of cheating at cards had turned deadly in the span of 3 heartbeats. Now he could not find his way back to the person he had been before, could not locate the trail that would lead him out of this wilderness of guilt and confusion. His father had been a cartographer back in Missouri before the war, and Xavier had inherited some of that talent for reading maps and understanding terrain, but all those skills seemed useless now, when he could not even map a course for his own life. The horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, stamped his hooves and pulled at the reins tied to a scraggly mesquite tree. Xavier stood and dried his hands on his dusty trousers, squinting up at the cloudless sky. He needed to find work, needed to do something besides drift and remember, but every town he rode through seemed to echo with judgment, even though no one knew his story. He had thought about heading north to Wyoming or even Montana, maybe finding work on one of the big ranches up there, but something kept pulling him west instead toward California and the promise of gold that had already played out for most men but still sang its siren song. He mounted Copper and urged the horse forward, letting the animal choose the path since Xavier had no particular destination in mind. They followed the river for another 2 miles before the landscape opened up into a broad valley dotted with sagebrush and creosote bushes. In the distance, he could see a small collection of buildings that might have been a ranch or a way station. His supplies were running low enough that he would need to stop soon regardless, so he pointed Copper toward the structures and let the horse set an easy pace. As they drew closer, Xavier could see that it was indeed a ranch, though not a prosperous one. The main house was adobe with a sagging roof, and the barn looked like it might collapse in the next strong wind. A few cattle grazed in a fenced pasture, their ribs showing through their hides. A woman stood in the yard, hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 posts. She turned at the sound of hoofbeats and watched his approach with a stillness that reminded him of a deer deciding whether to bolt or stand its ground. Xavier reined in about 20 feet from the clothesline and touched the brim of his hat. "Afternoon, madam. I'm looking for work if you have any need of a hand. I can mend fences, work cattle, break horses, pretty much anything that needs doing." The woman studied him for a long moment. She was young, probably close to his own age, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes the color of good whiskey. Her dress was faded calico, patched in several places but clean. There was something in the way she held herself that spoke of competence and strength, a woman who had learned to do for herself out of necessity rather than choice. "My father passed 3 weeks ago," she said, her voice steady despite the grief that flickered across her face. "I have been trying to keep things running, but I am one person, and this ranch needs at least 3. I can pay you room and board and $20 a month if you're willing to work hard." "That is more than fair," Xavier said, surprised by the relief that washed through him. Work meant purpose, and purpose might mean a way forward. "My name is Xavier Yates." "Delilah Kensington," she replied, and stuck out her hand like a man would. Xavier dismounted and shook it, noting the calluses on her palm and the strength in her grip. "You can put your horse in the barn. There is a bunkhouse out back, though it needs some cleaning. I will have supper ready at sundown." Xavier led Copper to the barn and found it in better shape than the exterior suggested. Someone had taken care with the structure even if they had not had the resources to maintain the cosmetic details. He unsaddled the gelding, rubbed him down, and gave him water and a portion of grain from the stores he found in the feed room. The bunkhouse was indeed dusty and full of cobwebs, but the roof was sound and the bunks were solid. He spent the next hour sweeping and airing the place out, then washed up at the pump in the yard and waited for sundown. Delilah called him to supper just as the first stars began appearing in the darkening sky. They ate at a rough wooden table in the kitchen. Simple food cooked well. Beans and cornbread and dried beef stewed with onions. She did not ask him questions about where he had come from or why he was drifting, and he was grateful for that. Instead, she talked about the ranch, about what needed doing, and what her plans were. "My father bought this land 10 years ago," she said, pouring him coffee from a battered pot. "He had dreams of building something substantial, but he never had quite enough capital to make it work. Then 2 years ago, he got sick. We managed, but it took everything we had saved just to keep going. Now he is gone, and I'm trying to decide if I should hold on or sell out and move to town." "What do you want to do?" Xavier asked. She looked at him with those whiskey-colored eyes, and he saw the fire burning there. "I want to make his dream work. I want to prove that this place can thrive. But wanting something and being able to do it are two different things." "Well," Xavier said slowly, "I reckon we can at least give it a try, see what we can accomplish in a few months." Something that might have been hope flickered across her face. "That would be good. I would like that." Over the next 2 weeks, Xavier threw himself into the work with a desperation that surprised him. He repaired fences, cleared brush, doctored the cattle, and started breaking a young mare that Delilah had been keeping in the corral. The physical labor exhausted him in a way that felt almost cleansing, and at night he fell into his bunk too tired to dream or remember. Delilah worked alongside him most days, and he found himself impressed by her capabilities. She could rope and brand as well as any cowhand he had known, could read the weather and the land with an intuition that seemed almost supernatural. It was that intuition that he first noticed on a night 3 weeks after his arrival. They had been riding the fence line in the far pasture, checking for breaks, and darkness had caught them farther from the house than they had intended. The moon had not yet risen, and the night was black as pitch, the kind of darkness that could make even familiar territory feel alien and threatening. "We should head back," Xavier said, though he could barely see his hand in front of his face, much less the way home. "Follow me," Delilah said, and he heard rather than saw her urge her horse forward. He followed the sound of hoofbeats, trusting that she knew where she was going even though he could not fathom how. They rode for perhaps 20 minutes, and then he began to see the dim outline of the ranch buildings ahead. She had brought them straight home without hesitation despite the absolute darkness. "How did you do that?" he asked, as they dismounted in the yard. She pointed up at the sky where stars were beginning to emerge as the last light faded from the western horizon. "The stars," she said simply. "My father taught me when I was young. He said a person who could read the stars would never be truly lost. You find your guiding stars, you learn the patterns, and they will always show you the way home." Xavier stared up at the glittering expanse above them and felt something shift in his chest. "I could use some guiding stars right about now," he said quietly, not meaning to speak the words aloud. Delilah looked at him for a long moment. "You seem like a man who's trying to find his way back from somewhere dark." He could have deflected, could have laughed it off or changed the subject, but something in her steady gaze made him want to be honest. "I killed a man 6 weeks ago in Tucson, self-defense, but that does not make him any less dead. I have been drifting ever since trying to figure out who I am now that I have done that." "Do you want to tell me what happened?" she asked, not with morbid curiosity but with genuine concern, so he told her. There in the darkness of the ranch yard with the horses shifting beside them, he told her about the card game, about the accusations and the escalation, about the moment when the other man had reached for his gun and Xavier had been faster. He told her about the blood and the shock and the way the saloon had gone silent. He told her about the sheriff's ruling and the way he had ridden out of town anyway because he could not stand to see the knowledge in people's eyes when they looked at him. "You defended your life," Delilah said when he finished. "That is not murder. That is survival." I know that in my head, Xavier replied, but my heart has not quite caught up yet. She reached out and took his hand, and he was startled by the warmth of her touch. Sometimes we have to go through the darkness before we can find our way back to the light. The stars do not shine as bright in the day, you know. We need the darkness to really see them. He looked down at their joined hands and felt something ease in his chest, some knot of tension he had been carrying beginning to loosen. Thank you, he said. Come on, she said, releasing his hand and turning toward the house. I will teach you. About the stars, I mean, if you want to learn. I would like that, Xavier said, and realized he meant it. And so began a new rhythm to their days and nights. They worked the ranch during the daylight hours, and after supper Delilah would take him outside and teach him the constellations. She showed him how to find Polaris, the North Star, by following the pointer stars in the Big Dipper. She taught him Orion and Cassiopeia and how the stars wheeled through the sky with the seasons. She showed him how to navigate by them, how to use them to find direction and location even in unfamiliar territory. My father learned this from a Navajo man he befriended years ago, she explained one night as they lay on their backs in the grass, staring up at the river of stars arcing across the sky. He said the old ways of navigation were dying out as more people relied on compasses and maps, but he thought it was important to preserve that knowledge. So he taught me, and now I am teaching you. Why? Xavier asked. Why take the time to teach me? She turned her head to look at him, and even in the starlight he could see the intensity in her eyes. Because you said you needed guiding stars. Because I think you're trying to find your way back to yourself, because I know what it feels like to be lost. You seem like the most unlost person I've ever met, he said. A sad smile crossed her face. I have had my own darkness to navigate. When my mother died giving birth to my stillborn brother, I was 12 years old. For a long time I felt like I was drowning in grief and guilt, wondering if there was something I could have done, some way I could have helped. My father took me out one night, much like this, and showed me the stars. He said that grief was like being lost in the dark, but if we could just find one star to guide us, we could begin to find our way forward. He showed me Vega, the brightest star in the summer sky, and told me that whenever I felt lost, I should look for it and remember that light always returns, even after the darkest night. Xavier felt his throat tighten with emotion. I am sorry you lost them. I am sorry you are carrying the weight of what you had to do, she replied, but I hope you can find your way back to yourself. I hope you can forgive yourself for surviving. He reached out and found her hand in the darkness, lacing his fingers through hers. You are helping me do that. This place, this work, these stars, you are helping me find my way. She squeezed his hand. Then I am glad you found this ranch. Glad you found me. They lay there for a long time, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Xavier felt the last of the darkness begin to lift from his soul. He was not healed yet, not entirely, but he could feel the possibility of healing, the promise that he might one day be able to live with what he had done and move forward into something better. As spring turned to summer, the ranch began to show signs of improvement. The cattle fattened on good grass, the fences stood straight and strong, and Xavier had broken 3 more horses that Delilah was able to sell in town for decent prices. They worked side by side through the long, hot days, and at night they continued their stargazing lessons, though increasingly those sessions became less about learning constellations and more about simply being together under the vast Arizona sky. Xavier found himself falling in love with her, though he tried to fight it at first. She was his employer. And more than that, she was someone who had given him a chance when he had been at his lowest point. He did not want to complicate that with his feelings, did not want to risk the fragile peace he had found. But love was not something that could be reasoned with or controlled, and every day it grew stronger until he could barely think of anything else. He saw it in the way she laughed when one of the new colts kicked up his heels and bucked around the corral. He saw it in the fierce concentration on her face when she was mending tack, her fingers nimble and sure. He saw it in the compassion in her eyes when she talked about her father, about his dreams and his struggles. He saw it in the way she looked up at the stars with a sense of wonder that never dimmed despite all the time she had gazed at them before. One night in late July, as they sat on the porch steps watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and crimson, Xavier finally worked up the courage to speak. "Delilah, I need to tell you something." She turned to him, her expression open and curious. "What is it?" "I have feelings for you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know I'm just a hired hand, and you have been kind enough to give me work when I needed it most, and I do not want to make things uncomfortable between us, but I cannot keep this to myself anymore. I am in love with you. I have been falling in love with you since that first night you showed me the stars." For a moment she just looked at him, and his heart sank, certain he had ruined everything. But then a smile spread across her face, radiant and joyful. "You foolish man," she said, and there was laughter in her voice. "I have been in love with you since the day you rode up to my clothesline looking lost and haunted and determined to do something good. I have been waiting for you to see it." Relief and joy flooded through him. "You have? Why did you not say anything?" "Because you needed time to find yourself again before you could truly be with someone else," she said, reaching out to touch his face. "I could see you were carrying so much guilt and pain. I wanted you to heal first to find your way back to the man you were meant to be. And you have. You have found your way, Xavier." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it felt like coming home after a long journey through the wilderness. She kissed him back with a passion that made his heart race, her hands tangling in his hair, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I love you," he said again, needing to say the words now that he could. "I love you, Delilah Kensington, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." "I will have you," she said, her eyes bright with tears of happiness. "I will have you and love you and navigate every storm with you. We will find our way together." They sat on those porch steps until the stars came out, and then Delilah took his hand and led him out into the yard. "Look," she said, pointing up at the sky, "Vega is rising. The star my father showed me when I was lost in grief. The star that taught me that light always returns after the darkness." Xavier looked up at the brilliant blue-white star climbing above the eastern horizon. "It is beautiful." "You found your way back," Delilah said softly. "You came to this ranch lost and haunted, and now you are here with me, whole and healed and ready to love. The darkness did not destroy you. It made you stronger." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on the top of her head. "You found me," he said. "I was lost, and you found me. You showed me the way back to myself." "We found each other," she corrected, leaning back against him. "And now we will never be lost again." They were married 6 weeks later by a circuit preacher who came through the area. It was a simple ceremony held in the ranch yard at sunset, with a few neighboring ranchers and their families as witnesses. Delilah wore a dress she had sewn herself from sky blue fabric she had bought in town, and Xavier wore his best shirt and trousers, his dark hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed his bride as the first stars began appearing in the purple twilight sky, and he felt a sense of rightness settle over him like a benediction. The neighboring ranchers and their wives had brought food, and they celebrated with a feast spread out on tables in the yard. There was music, too, a fiddler and a man with a guitar, and Xavier danced with his wife under the stars while their friends clapped and cheered. Delilah was radiant, her face glowing with happiness, and Xavier thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. Later, after the guests had left and the dishes had been cleared away, Xavier and Delilah walked out to the far pasture, hand in hand. The moon was a bright silver crescent, and the Milky Way sprawled across the sky like a river of light. "This is where our real life begins," Delilah said, stopping in the middle of the pasture and turning to face him. Everything before was just the journey that led us to each other. I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you, Xavier said, cupping her face in his hands. Every dark moment, every mile I drifted, all of it was worth it to find you. She kissed him then, deep and passionate, and he gathered her into his arms and held her close. They made love there under the stars, on a blanket spread in the grass with the whole universe watching over them. It was tender and intense and perfect, and when they finally lay tangled together afterward, breathless and satisfied, Xavier traced patterns on Delilah's bare shoulder and felt more at peace than he had ever thought possible. "Tell me about the stars," he murmured. "Tell me their stories." So she did, pointing out constellations and sharing the myths and legends associated with them. She told him about Cygnus the Swan flying along the Milky Way. She showed him the summer triangle made by Vega, Deneb, and Altair. She traced the outline of Scorpius crawling along the southern horizon, and as she spoke, Xavier listened and marveled at this woman who had saved him, who had shown him the way back to himself, who had loved him when he could barely love himself. "I have something for you," he said suddenly, remembering. He reached for his discarded shirt and pulled a small wrapped package from the pocket. "It is not much, but I wanted to give you something for our wedding day." Delilah sat up, holding the blanket to her chest, and took the package. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a silver compass on a chain. It was old but well made, the case engraved with an intricate pattern of stars. "It was my father's," Xavier explained. "The only thing I kept of his after he died. He used it when he was mapping territory back in Missouri. I thought you should have it, since you taught me that the best navigation comes from the stars, but sometimes a compass can help too." Tears sparkled in Delilah's eyes as she held the compass up, watching it catch the moonlight. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Thank you, Xavier. I will treasure it always." "We will never be lost again," he said, echoing her words from before. "We have the stars and we have each other." She fastened the chain around her neck and the compass settled at the hollow of her throat. Then she pulled him down beside her again, and they lay together under the stars, husband and wife, two people who had found each other in the darkness and forged a path into the light. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch slowly prospered under their combined efforts. Xavier proved to have a talent for breeding horses, and they began to build a reputation for quality stock. Delilah managed the cattle operation and kept the books, her head for numbers as sharp as her ability to navigate by the stars. They worked hard, saved their money, and reinvested in the land and the stock. In the spring of 1879, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. Xavier was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure, worried about the risks of childbirth after what had happened to Delilah's mother. But Delilah remained calm and practical, making arrangements with a doctor in the nearest town and preparing everything well in advance. Their son was born in November of that year, a healthy, squalling infant they named Samuel after Xavier's father. Xavier held his son for the first time with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the flood of love and protectiveness that crashed over him. Delilah, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him from the bed. "He is perfect," Xavier said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are both perfect." "He has your eyes," Delilah said, "and I think he's going to have your stubborn streak too, based on how hard he fought to come into this world." Xavier laughed, tears streaming down his face. "I love you so much. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a family, for giving me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Delilah said, reaching out to take his hand. "We found each other in the darkness, and we built this life together. This is ours, Xavier, our son, our ranch, our love, all of it." Samuel grew into a lively, curious child who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. Xavier taught him to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and Samuel took to it with a natural grace that reminded Xavier of Delilah. In the evenings, Delilah would take Samuel outside and teach him about the stars, just as her father had taught her and she had taught Xavier. The little boy would stare up at the night sky with wonder, asking endless questions, and Delilah would answer them all with patience and love. 2 years after Samuel was born, Delilah became pregnant again. This time it was twins, a boy and a girl. The birth was difficult, and Xavier spent hours pacing outside the bedroom while the doctor and a midwife from a neighboring ranch worked. When the doctor finally emerged, looking exhausted but pleased, Xavier nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a son and a daughter," the doctor said, "and your wife is tired but well. She is asking for you." Xavier rushed into the bedroom to find Delilah propped up against pillows, a baby cradled in each arm. She looked exhausted but triumphant, her hair damp with sweat but her eyes bright. "Meet Daniel and Rose," she said, smiling. "Well, your son and daughter." Xavier knelt beside the bed, looking at his new children with awe. Daniel had a shock of dark hair like his mother, while Rose was fair like Xavier. Both had healthy pink faces and strong lungs if their cries were any indication. "You are incredible," Xavier said to Delilah, kissing her forehead. "You are the strongest, most amazing woman I have ever known." "We are a family of 5 now," Delilah said, her voice full of wonder. "Can you believe it? 5 years ago I was alone on this ranch wondering if I would have to sell it and move to town. Now look at us." "You were never truly alone," Xavier said. "You had your father's memory and the stars to guide you, but I am glad you found me. I am glad I got lost so that you could show me the way home." She leaned her head against his shoulder, careful of the babies. "We found each other, and now we have built something beautiful." The ranch continued to grow and thrive. They added more land, bought more cattle and horses, and built a new, larger house to accommodate their expanding family. Samuel, at 7 years old, was already helping with the horses, showing a gift for training that rivaled his father's. The twins, Daniel and Rose, were 4 and into everything, bright and curious and full of energy. On a warm evening in late summer of 1884, Xavier and Delilah stood on the porch of their new house, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was teaching the twins to rope a fence post, and their laughter rang out in the golden light of the setting sun. "Do you ever think about that night when you rode up to my clothesline?" Delilah asked, slipping her hand into Xavier's. "All the time," Xavier said. "I think about how lost I was, how dark everything seemed. I had convinced myself that I was beyond redemption, that I would just drift forever, trying to outrun what I had done." "But you found your way back," Delilah said. "Or rather, we found each other, and you found your way back through that." Xavier nodded, squeezing her hand. "You saved me, Delilah. You and this ranch and those stars you taught me to navigate by. You showed me that even when we go through the darkest times, there is always light to guide us home if we know where to look for it." "You saved me too," Delilah said quietly. "I was so alone after my father died. I was trying to be strong, trying to keep everything together, but I was drowning under the weight of it all. Then you came along, this haunted cowboy who needed purpose as much as I needed help, and we saved each other." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. The sky was beginning to turn the deep blue of early twilight, and the first stars were appearing. "There is Vega," Delilah said, pointing to the bright star rising in the east, "the star that my father showed me when I was lost in grief, the star that has guided us both." Xavier pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "I love you, Delilah Yates. I love the life we have built together. I love our children and our ranch and the future we are creating. Every day with you is a gift." "I love you too," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "You are my guiding star, Xavier. You and our children, and this life we share. I would not change a single moment of our journey because it brought us here." They kissed as the stars came out above them, and their children's laughter filled the air. It was a moment of perfect contentment, the kind of moment that defines a life. In the years that followed, the Yates Ranch became one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Arizona Territory. Xavier's eye for quality stock and his gentle training methods produced horses that were in high demand throughout the Southwest. Delilah managed the business side with her characteristic competence, and together they built something that far exceeded her father's original dream. Samuel grew into a fine young man, tall and capable, with his father's way with horses and his mother's sharp mind. At 18, he was already handling most of the training operations, allowing Xavier to focus on breeding and selection. Daniel, at 15, showed more interest in the cattle side of the operation, and he spent his days riding the range and managing the herds. Rose, also 15, had inherited her mother's gift for navigation and her father's sense of justice. She talked of becoming a teacher, of sharing knowledge with others the way her mother had shared the stars with her father. Xavier was 43 years old in 1896 when Arizona was still a territory awaiting statehood. He and Delilah would sometimes sit on their porch in the evenings, watching their grown and nearly grown children work, and marvel at how far they had come. "Do you ever regret it?" Delilah asked him one evening. "Staying here instead of moving on to California or Montana or wherever you were headed when you found this place?" Xavier looked at her, at the silver beginning to thread through her dark hair, at the lines of laughter and hard work around her eyes, at the compass she still wore on its chain around her neck, and he smiled. "Not for one single second. This is exactly where I was meant to be. You are exactly who I was meant to find." "Even though you were so lost when you arrived?" she teased gently. "Especially because I was so lost," he said seriously. "If I had not been lost, I would never have stopped here. I would never have found you. Sometimes we have to lose our way before we can find our true path." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun set together as they had done thousands of times before. The sky turned gold, then orange, then deep purple, and the stars began to emerge one by one. Vega rose in the east, as bright and steadfast as ever. "Tell me," Xavier said softly, "tell me again about the stars." So Delilah did, her voice soft and familiar, pointing out the constellations and tracing their paths across the sky. And Xavier listened, as enchanted by her knowledge and passion as he had been that first night when she had begun to teach him. Some things, he thought, never lost their magic. Their grandson was born in 1897, Samuel's son, named Xavier after his grandfather. When Samuel and his wife brought the baby to visit, Xavier held the tiny infant and felt the circle complete itself. This child would grow up on the ranch, would learn to ride and rope and read the stars, would carry forward the legacy that Xavier and Delilah had built. "He is perfect," Xavier said, looking down at the sleeping baby. "Look at him, Delilah. This is our legacy, this ranch, these children and grandchildren, the life we built from nothing." "From everything," Delilah corrected gently. "We built it from love and determination and the willingness to find our way even when the path was dark." Xavier nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He handed the baby back to Samuel and pulled Delilah into his arms. "I was so lost," he whispered into her hair. "I was so broken and lost and sure that I would never find my way back to anything good, and then you found me." "We found each other," she said, as she always did, "and we built this beautiful life together." That night, after Samuel and his family had gone home to their own house, on the far side of the ranch property, Xavier and Delilah walked out to the pasture where they had spent their wedding night so many years before. The grass was soft beneath their feet, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. "Do you remember?" Xavier asked, pulling her close. "Do you remember lying here under the stars, so young and full of hope?" "I remember everything," Delilah said. "I remember the way you looked at me, like I was the answer to every question you had ever asked. I remember the way you held me, like you were afraid I might disappear. I remember the promises we made." "We kept them," Xavier said, "every single one. We loved each other through good times and hard times. We built a life and a family. We never let the darkness win." Delilah looked up at the stars, at the familiar constellations that had guided them both for so long. "My father told me that the stars were constant, that they would always be there to show us the way home. But I think he was wrong about that." Xavier looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him, her hands on his chest, and smiled. "The stars are wonderful, and navigation is important, but the real constant in my life has been you. You are my true north, Xavier Yates. You are what guides me home every single day." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and it was like being young again, like that first kiss on the porch steps when they had finally admitted their love. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "I love you," Xavier said. "I will love you until the stars fall from the sky and beyond." "And I will love you just as long," Delilah replied. "Longer even, forever and always." They lay down in the grass together, holding hands and watching the stars, and Xavier thought about the journey that had brought him here. He thought about that young man who had ridden up to a struggling ranch with blood on his hands and darkness in his soul. He thought about the woman who had seen past all of that to the man he could be, the man he was meant to be. He thought about the love they had built and the family they had created and the legacy they would leave behind. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for finding me when I was lost. Thank you for showing me the way home." "Thank you for staying," Delilah replied. "Thank you for loving me and building this life with me. Thank you for being the man I always knew you could be." They lay there until the moon rose, silver and beautiful, casting its light across the land they had worked so hard to build into something worth having. And when they finally rose and walked hand in hand back to their house, Xavier felt the same sense of peace and rightness that had settled over him on their wedding night. He was home. He was loved. He had found his way. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Daniel married a woman from a neighboring ranch, and they had 3 daughters who were the lights of their grandparents' lives. Rose did indeed become a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch where she taught not only her nieces and nephews, but also the children of the ranch hands and neighboring families. She remained unmarried by choice, finding fulfillment in her work and her family, and Xavier and Delilah loved and respected her for making her own path. Samuel took over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Xavier and Delilah grew older, though Xavier remained active in the breeding program and Delilah still kept the books. They had built something that would outlast them, something that would continue on through their children and grandchildren, and that knowledge brought them deep satisfaction. In the spring of 1905, Xavier turned 52 years old. He was still strong and capable, his body honed by decades of physical labor, though his hair had gone completely gray, and his face was lined with the marks of a life well lived. Delilah was 50 as well, and if anything, she had grown more beautiful with age. There was a serenity about her, a deep contentment that showed in her smile and the way she moved through the world. They celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary that August with a gathering of their entire family. Samuel and his wife and their 4 children, Daniel and his wife and their 3 daughters, Rose, and all the ranch hands who had become like extended family over the years. They roasted beef and made music and danced under the stars just as they had on their wedding night so many years before. As the party wound down and people began drifting toward their homes, Xavier and Delilah found themselves alone once more on the porch steps where they had first confessed their love. The stars were brilliant overhead, and Vega shone bright in the east. 27 years, Xavier said wonderingly. "How did we get here so fast?" "One day at a time," Delilah said, taking his hand. "One sunrise, one sunset, one moment of love and work and joy at a time." "I would do it all again," Xavier said. "Every single moment, the good and the hard, all of it, just to end up here with you." "We are not ended yet," Delilah pointed out. "We have many more years ahead of us, God willing, many more sunrises and sunsets to share." Xavier pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. Then I will treasure every single one. You saved my life, Delilah. I was lost, and you found me, and you showed me the way back to myself. Everything good in my life came from that moment when I rode up to your clothesline and you took a chance on a drifting cowboy with haunted eyes. You saved my life too, she said. I was drowning in loneliness and responsibility, trying to hold on to my father's dream with bleeding hands. You came along and helped me make it real. We saved each other, Xavier. That is what love does. It saves us. They sat there for hours, talking and remembering and planning for the future. They talked about Samuel taking over the ranch completely, about maybe traveling a bit, seeing California and the ocean, visiting places they had only dreamed of. They talked about their grandchildren and what they might become. They talked about the land and the horses and the life they had built from love and determination. And when they finally went inside, walking through the house that echoed with the presence of their children and grandchildren who had been there earlier, Xavier felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance at life when he had not deserved one. He had been given love when he had felt unworthy of it. He had been shown the way home when he had been hopelessly lost. In 1910, Xavier was 57 years old and still actively involved in running the ranch, though he had slowed down some. His joints ached in the mornings, and long days in the saddle took more out of him than they once had. But he was healthy and happy, surrounded by family and engaged in work he loved. That summer, Samuel's oldest son, young Xavier, who was now 13, asked his grandfather to teach him about navigation by the stars. Xavier was touched and pleased, and he took the boy out that very night. "Your grandmother is the real expert," Xavier said as they walked out to the pasture. "She is the one who taught me everything I know about the stars." "But grandmother said I should learn from you," young Xavier replied. "She said that you were lost once and she found you, and that makes you the best person to teach me how to never be lost." Xavier felt his throat tighten with emotion. Trust Delilah to understand what this would mean to him. "All right then," he said. "Let me show you what your grandmother taught me." He showed the boy Polaris and how to find it using the Big Dipper. He traced out Cassiopeia and Orion and the Summer Triangle. He explained how the stars moved through the seasons and how you could use them to navigate even in the darkest night. And as he taught, he remembered that first night when Delilah had brought him home through the pitch darkness, guided only by the stars, and he had begun to understand that maybe he could find his way after all. "Why were you lost, grandfather?" young Xavier asked as they sat in the grass looking up at the Milky Way. Xavier thought about how to answer that. The boy was old enough to hear the truth, he decided. "I did something that I thought made me a bad person," he said carefully. "I killed a man in self-defense. And even though I had no choice, I could not forgive myself for it. So I drifted, trying to run away from what I had done, trying to find a place where I could forget. But you cannot outrun yourself, Xavier. You cannot escape who you are." "So what did you do?" the boy asked. "I found your grandmother," Xavier said simply. "Or she found me. She gave me work and purpose, and then she taught me about the stars. She showed me that even when we go through dark times, there is always light to guide us home if we know where to look for it. She helped me forgive myself and find my way back to being a good man." "Do you still think about the man you killed?" young Xavier asked. "Sometimes," Xavier admitted, "but not with guilt anymore. I made peace with it a long time ago. I did what I had to do to survive, and then I spent the rest of my life trying to live in a way that would honor that survival. I built a life and a family. I worked hard and treated people fairly. I loved your grandmother with everything I had. That is the legacy I want to leave, not the memory of one terrible moment." Young Xavier was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he said, "I hope if I ever get lost, someone like grandmother finds me." Xavier smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "I hope you never get lost at all. But if you do, remember what I'm teaching you tonight. The stars will always show you the way home. And more importantly, the people who love you will always be there to guide you back." They stayed out for another hour, and then Xavier walked his grandson back to Samuel's house. Delilah was waiting on their porch when he returned, and he sat down beside her with a contented sigh. "Thank you for sending him to me," Xavier said. "I thought you would appreciate teaching him," Delilah replied, "and I thought he would appreciate learning from the man who was lost and found his way home." "You make me sound like a parable from the Bible," Xavier said with a laugh. "Maybe you are," Delilah said, her eyes twinkling. "A story about redemption and love and finding your way in the darkness. Those are stories worth telling." Xavier took her hand and brought it to his lips. "The only story I care about is ours. The story of a lost cowboy and a woman who could navigate by the stars. The story of how we found each other and built a life that exceeded our wildest dreams." "It is a good story," Delilah agreed. "And we are still writing it, you and I. Every day we write a new page." "Then let us make sure the rest of the pages are just as beautiful as the ones we have already written," Xavier said. They sat together in the darkness, holding hands and watching the stars, and Xavier thought about all the miles he had traveled and all the darkness he had walked through to get to this moment. It had all been worth it. Every step, every struggle, every moment of pain and doubt, all of it had led him here, to this porch, to this woman, to this life, this woman. He was no longer lost. He had found his way home. The years continued their steady march forward. Xavier and Delilah grew older together, their love deepening and maturing like good wine. They watched their grandchildren grow up and begin to have children of their own. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, and the Yates name became synonymous with quality horses and fair dealing throughout Arizona. In 1915, Xavier was 62 years old, and Arizona had finally achieved statehood 3 years earlier. He and Delilah had lived to see the territory they loved become part of the United States, and it felt like a fitting culmination to their life's work. They had helped build this land, had poured their sweat and love into it, and now it was officially recognized as an important part of the nation. That fall, on a crisp October evening, Xavier and Delilah celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The entire family gathered once again, 3 generations of Yateses filling the ranch with laughter and love. There was food and music and dancing, and as the sun set and the stars came out, Xavier stood and called for everyone's attention. "I want to say something," he announced, and the crowd quieted. 40 years ago, I was a lost man. I was drifting without purpose or direction, carrying a burden of guilt that I thought would crush me. Then I rode up to this ranch and met the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Delilah gave me work when I needed it, but more than that, she gave me hope. She taught me to navigate by the stars, and in doing so, she taught me how to find my way back to myself." He turned to look at Delilah, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. "You saved my life," he said simply. "You loved me when I could not love myself. You believed in me when I had lost all faith. You showed me that even the darkest night ends and the stars always return. Everything good in my life, everything beautiful and worthwhile, came from you." He held out his hand and she came to him, and everyone cheered as they kissed. When they broke apart, Delilah turned to address the crowd. "Xavier says I saved him," she said, her voice strong and clear. "But the truth is, we saved each other. I was alone and struggling when he came along, trying to hold on to my father's dream with bleeding hands. Xavier gave me partnership and support and love. He helped me make the dream real, and then we built something even better than I had imagined. This ranch, this family, this life, it is ours. We created it together from love and determination and faith in each other." She looked up at her husband. "I would not change a single moment of our journey. Every trial, every hardship, every joy, all of it brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." The celebration continued late into the night, and when it was over and everyone had gone home, Xavier and Delilah walked out to their favorite spot in the pasture. They lay down in the grass just as they had on their wedding night 40 years before and looked up at the stars. "Vega is up there," Delilah said, pointing. "Still shining, still guiding after all these years. Like our love, Xavier said, constant and true, shining through the darkness. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, and then Delilah said, "Do you remember what you said to me that night on the porch steps when you first told me you loved me?" "I said a lot of things," Xavier replied with a smile. "You said you wanted to spend the rest of your life with me," Delilah said, "and we have. 40 years, Xavier. 40 years of love and work and building this life together, and I would gladly give you 40 more if we had them." "I will take every moment I can get with you," Xavier said, turning on his side to look at her. "You are my guiding star, Delilah. You are what led me home and what keeps me grounded. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is how it works with us. The love just keeps growing." She turned to face him, reaching out to touch his weathered face. "I am so grateful that you were lost that day. So grateful that you rode up to my clothesline looking for work. So grateful for every moment we have shared since then." "I was lost," Xavier agreed, "but you found me, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." They kissed there under the stars, two people who had loved each other for 40 years and would love each other for as long as they had left. And when they finally rose and walked hand in hand back to their house, Xavier felt the same sense of rightness and peace that he had felt on their wedding night. He was home. He was loved. He had found his way, and he would never be lost again. As they reached the porch, Delilah paused and looked back at the sky. Vega shone brilliant in the east, the same star that had guided them for so long. "Thank you," she whispered to the star, to the universe, to whatever force had brought them together. "Thank you for leading us to each other." Xavier wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. "The stars brought us together," he said, "but love kept us here. Love built this life. Love made us who we are." "Love and faith," Delilah added. "Faith that even in the darkest times light will return. Faith that love can heal and redeem and transform." "You had faith in me when I had none in myself," Xavier said. "You saw past the guilt and the darkness to the man I could be. You believed in me, and that belief gave me the strength to become worthy of it." Delilah turned in his arms to face him. "You were always worthy, Xavier. You just needed time to see it, and I was honored to be the one to show you." They went inside then, into the house that held 40 years of memories, 40 years of love and laughter and life, and as Xavier closed the door behind them, he looked back once more at the stars shining overhead. He had been lost once wandering in darkness, but Delilah had found him and shown him the way home. She had navigated by the stars and brought him safely to harbor, and for that, he would be grateful every day for the rest of his life. Their story could have ended in tragedy, with Xavier lost forever in guilt and aimlessness, but instead it had become a story of redemption and love, of two people finding each other in the darkness and building a life that shone as bright as the stars themselves. It was a story worth living, worth remembering, worth passing down to the generations that would come after them. As Xavier and Delilah prepared for bed that night, moving through the familiar rituals of 40 years of marriage, Xavier thought about young Xavier and all the other grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward. He hoped they would remember this story, the story of the lost cowboy and the woman who navigated by the stars. He hoped they would remember that love can heal, that faith can redeem, that even the darkest night gives way to dawn. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, settling into bed beside him. "About legacy," Xavier said, pulling her close. "About the life we built and the story we are leaving behind. I hope our grandchildren remember us and learn from our journey." "They will remember," Delilah said confidently. "They will remember that you were lost and I found you, and together we built something beautiful. They will remember that love is what matters most, that love is what guides us home when we have lost our way." Xavier kissed her forehead. "You are my home, Delilah. You always have been, From that very first night when you showed me the stars, you are my north, my guide, my light in the darkness. And you are mine, she replied, my lost cowboy who found his way home, my love, my partner, my heart. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for 40 years, secure in the love they shared and the life they had built. Outside, the stars wheeled through the sky in their eternal dance, and Vega shone bright and steady in the east, a beacon of light in the darkness, just as it had been for all those years. The story of Xavier and Delilah Yates was a story of the Old West, of hard work and determination, of building something from nothing. But more than that, it was a love story, a story of two people finding each other when they needed it most and creating a life together that exceeded their wildest dreams. It was a story of navigation and faith, of stars and love, of being lost and being found. And on that 40th anniversary night, as they slept peacefully in each other's arms, the stars above them seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was celebrating the love they shared. Xavier Yates had been lost, wandering in darkness and guilt, but Delilah Kensington had found him. She had navigated by the stars and brought him home, and together they had built a life that would echo through generations. The cowboy had been lost, but the woman who could navigate by the stars had found him, and in that finding, they had both been saved.